it away, Eli.
Great. Well, let's go. Welcome, everybody. This is the Cardboard Brain Metacognitive Design Exercise session for the 2022 Vermont State Science Teachers Association annual meeting. Woo! 17th of January, where there's a big old snowstorm. I hope people are doing wonderful things, and maybe you'll catch on to this later, but let's begin, shall we? So I'm going to share my screen, and let's do that. So here's our slideshow. We'll start with a slideshow, and we've got some introductions through the slideshow. It is the Cardboard Brain. There's one right there. It's a metacognitive design activity progression, and we're here to sort of look at it, kick the tires a little bit, discuss it, see how it might be adapted. I'm Eli Rosenberg, 7-8 science teacher at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, Vermont. That's where I'm talking to you from today. There's my email, eli@mpsvt.org, and my phone number. Please reach out, get in touch. Any questions, anything you want to talk about, I'm around. And here's sort of what I have planned. We have about an hour, give or take. We'll start with some introductions, some meets, some greets, probably not with breakout rooms. And then we'll take a look at the actual design brief and the progression, and then we can react, reflect, and connect about it. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to feel connected to other people in our profession, and I hope we all get something like that out of this, and also to use equity and arts lenses to look at this progression. So any thoughts that you have in those areas will be really not only helpful, but really that's why we're here and why I'm doing this. That's my motivation. I hope we get something out of that. So as a warm-up, if there were lots of us, we would maybe do this in a breakout, but for now, if you want to just hit the link, there's a Jamboard map, and you can put a photo or a drawing of yourself, a sticky note with your name and your home or your birthplace, and a line connecting that sticky note to your home or your birthplace, really wherever you want to put is fine on the map. And I'll ask you to share one or two things about how we got from there to here, wherever here is today. So if you take a look at the map, this is Jamboard, and you see I'm on there, and we've got Anonymous Elephant. Hi, Elephant. There's a picture of me. I grew up in Middlebury, so I've connected myself to Middlebury, even though I'm calling you from Montpelier. And if you're familiar with Jamboard, that's great. Go ahead. If not, you can use the left menu to pop out a little sticky note and put it on the board and put some text on it. I feel like we need a little elevator music as we do this. There you go. Long Island, one of many New York islands. Hi, Maggie. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everybody. That's awesome.
I don't know. It's whatever was on my Spotify.
That's good. Nice.
But I live.
Yeah, Adriana, we need to put Puerto Rico on the map. Go ahead and draw it for us. That'd be great for sure. Yeah. Sherry's from Mid-Coast, Maine. You're not from anywhere near Hog Island, are you, by any chance, Sherry? Just out of curiosity.
Probably about 45 minutes away from there.
Okay. All right. Right on. I spent some time in the Audubon bird camp.
Sure.
It was really, really a good. It was just a week, but it was a really good week. I loved it. So.
I have only gone to Maine a handful of times. I went to Bar Harbor once, which was super fun. It was before the tourist season, so everything was closed, but it was warm enough to enjoy camping. And then I had gone to Portland 2 or 3 times.
Right on.
One time when I was super pregnant, only for lobster. Like literally, I woke up and I was like, get in the car. I said to my husband, and we drove 3.5 hours to go to Portland, Maine. I ate a lobster, and then we got back in the car. We drove back to Vermont. And
It wasn't pickles and ice cream.
no, it wasn't. It was very specific. I wanted lobster from there is a wharf that was north of Portland, and it's like I don't even know the name of it. I just knew that randomly Yelp sent me there one time, and now it's my go-to place. It's on some like random suburb street. You just drive to the end, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's some lobster. Anyway,
That's nice. Yeah. I once had lobster ice cream in Maine, and it had lumps of butter in it, which sounds absolutely atrocious, but it's actually secretly pretty good. I mean, if you eat meat and dairy and all that, it's one of those things. Just like it shouldn't make sense, but it's actually okay. So that's
I don't
kind
know
of
if we're
seen
trying
it.
to convince
I've never had it.
Adriana to come to the Northeast, but
oh yeah. Oh, awesome. Mouse genetics, knockout mice. Excellent. That's good stuff. Is Nationwide Children's Hospital a research hospital, Adriana? I'm curious. Is it like that kind of work, or is it like clinical care?
Rare pediatric diseases, all the way from congenital heart disease to now suicide prevention. That's our latest center acquisition.
Okay. Yeah. Excellent. You're a little faint. I'm going to see if I can increase the volume of your mic on my my sound, but that's okay. We'll keep going. All right. So that's the first hurdle. Let's move forward one slide. We're not going to do a breakout room or anything, but like a 4x5x1 icebreaker, we would, since we are about that many people, take a couple of minutes just to ask or answer a question. And Johnny, you kind of got the ball rolling, I think. What are one or two interesting things about your journey from your home or your birthplace to us here today? And Adriana, if you want to talk a little bit about how you ended up working with mice in Ohio, or any other part of the journey, or how you got here, because Ohio is not somewhere else. I'd love to hear it. And then would you, Adriana, just pass it on to someone else in our group, and then we'll just pass it forward. Is that okay?
Yeah. So I moved to Ohio when I was 21 to pursue graduate school as a developmental biologist, and it was actually the first time that I was in a laboratory. They gave me the opportunity, even though I didn't have laboratory experience. So I'm really grateful to the US for that. And the biggest hurdle was the cold. Over to you, Maggie.
So I am the science specialist for Vermont, and the way that I got to Vermont was in 2014 is my husband and I decided that we did not want to live in Metro New York, and we took out a map and we looked at all the states and settled on Vermont. That literally is how we got here. I was a public school teacher for a number of years before getting an opportunity to go to the state level to work on their science assessment, because I really felt that having an educator being part of the actual development of state summative assessment was important, because I kind of knew how students learned. So that's kind of my journey from Long Island to Vermont, from teaching to the state. And then I will give it to Shari.
Hello, I'm just going to put in, I started off in Indiana, actually. So I made that little mark there, and I'll move a little sticky over to it. What started off as a zoology major, ended up as a communications, environmental science, systems analysis major. Couldn't find what I wanted to do when I moved or got out of school, and ended up taking a long-term sub position. And 31 that I thought, okay, I can do this for a couple of years. 31 years later, I left the classroom, and for the last 8 years, I've been the science specialist in Maine at the Department of Education. So 4 years of teaching, I guess, in Connecticut, and the rest was up in Maine.
And I think that leaves me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I grew up in Middlebury and ended up going to college for East Asian studies, specifically Japanese language and history, with an intent to take a business position. And I had crazily enough, I had a externship lined up in Japan upon graduation, decided to work at a summer camp just before I went, what the heck? And either I fell in love with a nurse or she fell in love with me, but we got this job at this outdoor education program called Nature's Classroom. And I found out within a week or two that I was really, really comfortable working with kids. And I really enjoyed being outdoors and talking about science. And I realized that I didn't want to go to Japan and I needed to probably be a science educator. Interestingly, my 7th grade science teacher is now the state herpetologist, Jim Andrews, but he had a lot of impact on that decision also. He's been sort of a mentor and a guide of mine in various ways to encourage me. So I became a science teacher. Took a little while to sort of go through some post-bac work and some graduate work. And then I decided that I should try and just get a job wherever. I fell in with middle school students in Missisquoi and Swanton. And I survived the year and learned that A, I really am probably happy in middle school, and B, the kinds of things that go through there, the people, the changes, the social unrest is stuff that I do pretty well with. So now 22 years later, I'm doing similar things at Main Street in Montpelier, and I've taught abroad for a couple of years. I've done a bunch of different kinds of things just to keep it interesting, but I've always come back to the middle school classroom in science. So that's sort of a longer version. I think just as a norm, you can unmute if you would like, and by all means, either raise a hand or just ask a question at any time. Just stop me. I'll probably be mostly looking at the slides, but if there's anything you want to say or ask, because it's a small group here, let's just jump in. Does that sound okay? I'll take that as a yes.
Sorry. Yes, I thumbed up. I don't know.
Yeah. Great. There we go. I'm going to put us and see Sherry got the thumbs up. Right on. We're Zoom pros at this point. We got this. All right. So next slide in the slideshow. Why do we do cardboard brain designs in my class? I've done it now for a while. It's got a lot of virtues. Builds growth mindsets, establishing a design cycle, science and engineering practice, toolbox skill. So it sets a tone for that. Also for a tone of creativity, inclusion, and thinking with our hands in our classroom. It's pretty and it helps me get to know students. You can see the pictures all up there. I think you can maybe see the one right in the center that's literally a hand holding a pink brain. But there are all kinds of different literal and metaphorical models that kids make every year. And it's really interesting to see. A little bit farther to the left, I think you can almost see the ballet shoes. It's a really interesting get to know you, but also cultural event in a classroom. So I've continued to do it. So that's why I do it. This is what it is. This is an example. This is Angela's. It's a literal or metaphorical model of a brain with a profile of learning passions and preferences. So there's a little close up of some of the things that Angela put about herself. She wrote a couple more things on her. She's a very artistic person. She feels like an easel is a good representation. And you see, she even put a little watercolor in there. And that's a really, really fine one. You know, it's a really good one. She's a person who came into my classroom with a lot of artistic skill. Here's another one. This one's a very literal person, Grace. She literally made a brain. And as you can see, one of the things I highlighted in here, she put that she spends time with her dog, Roxy. She loves her dog. And there's some sort of other facets that she's put on the brain. But for Grace, the idea of having to be creative was definitely a little bit scary. So she said, I'm just going to go with the brain model. And, you know, that for her, that felt very safe and very straightforward. We have a template like that Grace used. This one right here belongs to Lillian. Lillian is, I would say, she's on the autism spectrum and she rarely expresses herself in words. But for her, this was not only an activity, but it was a way for me to communicate with her early on and build a rapport and make a connection. Everybody does one. It's important to me that every student sees something that they've made in our classroom hanging from the ceiling every day if they want to. It's a representation of themselves. And for Lillian, she lives on a farm up right on the Calais to Woodbury border up in the woods. And so for her, this is, part of where she lives and it's important for her. And I get to know that about her. She's not completely nonverbal, but she doesn't say a lot. So when I do it, there are sort of 3 big high impact takeaways for the 3 phases of the progression. I ask kids to think about why they should design models of brains and learn about their brains. It's partly to help them build a growth mindset, to get away from just, I can't learn this, to this is how I learn and this is how I'm going to grow. In terms of making the model, what goes into the model, I want them to do a learning inventory, a learning survey, and creatively express their learning style, and know that and be able to express it themselves. And then in terms of how they design the model, we use a design cycle, just the very first toe in the ocean of engineering design, but we start the idea of a design cycle, and that's sort of the process that we use. So for each of those 3 things, I really want the kids to understand that, and I want to make sure they understand it and why we're doing it and what we're doing and how we do it. And then I'll leverage those things moving forward in all the rest of the units of the year. So that's sort of the background, if that makes sense. I have a learning activity progression. One of the things, how should I call you? Margaret, Maggie, Meg, Maggie?
You can call me, you can call me anything. Maggie, Margaret.
Well,
Hey,
yeah.
you.
Hey, you. Hi. Hey, one of the things that was important and interesting in this presentation was putting in some of the tools that I use when I go virtual. Particularly last year, we had only 1 or 2 virtual weeks, but a year and a half ago in the spring, we used Pear Deck an awful lot, and we used Jamboards. Jamboards have really come into their own now, but Pear Deck was a big thing. I just want to ask you guys, do you guys want to do this as students using Pear Deck? Why not, right? It could be kind of cool. In which case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop out of this and I will launch Pear Deck here. And what it'll do is I'll ask you to go to this website right here. So can you see an instructor paced activity? And Pear Deck it's amazing for virtual instruction. You know this, I'm assuming, but let's go through it. Let's try it out. So you go to open up a new tab or a new window and click join, or go to joinpd.com, like joinpeardeck.com, joinpd.com, and then type LBWWGM for a code. Lovely bandanas, warmly guish green muffins. Oh, it's not bad. Let's be warm with good meetings. Okay, that's not bad either. Anybody want to? And once you've entered into the Pear Deck, it'll tell me that you're students, and then we'll roll with it. I got 2.
Eli, tell me again how I access that.
You go to joinpd.com, joinpd.com. And then it'll ask you for a code, and our code is LBWWGM. And you don't have to do it if you don't want it, but it's kind of fun.
I put the link in the chat, and then
Got it.
Right on. And you don't have to wait for everybody to arrive. You can actually start, and as you start, what happens is the code LBWWGM pops up.
cool. I've only actually seen people use this. I myself have not used this.
Let's do it. It's great. Right? All right. So we're going to actually full screen that for now. All right. So here's the cardboard brain. And how do I minimize this? I'll get this out of the way. All right. The cardboard brain metacognitive design activity progression. So I'm going to skip forward to where we were. And Sherry, just check me on this. Are you able to find joinpd.com? And then if you look at the screen I'm sharing with you, the code is up at the top right corner.
Yeah, I think I'm coming in.
Okay, great. And you'll pop right in. And it'll ask you how you
It had to go to outer space and then back to main.
Yep.
Take some
I,
Excellent. So first, I did an NGSX training a little while ago, and one of the things that really stuck with me is that we should build our knowledge together as students and as people. So I'm gonna, this is a short video, it's like 20 seconds. Yeah, got it. If you want to take a look at the video, you can pop it out in a new window. Just click on it. I've got the session playing if you take a look at it, but it is animal neurons growing in a tissue culture. It's 20 power magnification. It's 8 hours per second, so they're moving really slowly in real life, but it's neurons. As you look at the video, I'd like you in the slide to write a response. Yeah. And I see I've got 2 of 3 responses. Okay, that's good. And I'm just going to pull up some of our responses here. Let's take a look at our responses. So developing axon with directionality. Somebody's still writing. First off, it's wicked cool. Fascinated with how it moves. Different variations of lit areas. So it's got a wonder about signals. Promote axon growth. Yeah. So I'm going to actually lock your screens and we're going to hide the responses. So we notice that they're growing. Those are brain cells. Brain cells just want to connect. You know what I mean? One of the things I always wonder about when I look at this is what's really happening in our brains, because this, of course, is in a petri dish. It's really hard to observe this in a person's actual living brain, right? So moving forward, your brain has 100 billion neurons. Michio Kaku has said that it's the most complex object in the known universe by an order of 10 that we know of. Here, if we were students, we'd have a short discussion about what we know about how the brain works. We'd sort of activate our prior knowledge, just think about it. Some kids look at this map of the brain and talk about this guy, Phineas Gage. A lot of kids have read a book about him. He had a railroad tamping iron, a big metal rod blown through his brain, hitting the green, bluish green prefrontal cortex right in the front. And so he lost a significant amount of planning, emotional judgment capability. He changed his personality, but he didn't die. Or similarly, kids talk about when, they see stars, their visual cortex in the back of the head gets hit. That's why you see stars. And there's lots of other things that people know about the brain. And with this part of the lesson, I'm just seeing what people know, basically. Your brains are constantly connecting these neurons, these 100 million neurons. What you pay attention to is what your brain learns. It's constantly happening. As Tom Brady, the quarterback, said, where your concentration goes, your energy flows, and that's what grows. I like to show middle school kids this slide particularly in the sense that at age 6, they all know their brain's connecting everything. And all of these connections literally makes them think that almost anything is possible, that maybe they can fly. But by age 14, a lot of those synapses, a lot of those connections have been pruned back. So talking to students at this point about how the brain is constantly growing is really complicated, but it's also always changing is really important. Some basic neurobiology. And then we watched this guy, L. Todd Rose, a fascinating man, a really, really brilliant man, give a TED Talk. We could watch it. It's only 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Let me just pull you guys out for a second and ask, would you like to watch 5 minutes and 40 seconds of this? We can. I have plenty of slideshow materials here for us to just sort of, I could give you the summary, but I don't know. Give me a thumbs up if you think maybe you'd like to watch it, or we can just get the summary. Yeah, Sherry, you up for it? Okay. Here we are. It's a fascinating story. So if I pop it open in a new window and I hit play right
So I've got my essay written and I've been working on it for about a week. So now I'm going to show you how I.
Oh man, thank you, Grammarly.
Please welcome to the TEDx Sonoma County stage, Todd Rose.
It's 1952, and the Air Force has a problem. They've got good pilots flying better planes, but they're getting worse results, and they don't know why. And for a while, they blame the pilots. They even blame the technology. And they eventually got around to blaming the flight instructors. But it turned out that the problem was actually with the cockpit. Let me explain. Imagine you're a fighter pilot. You're operating a machine that in some cases can travel faster than the speed of sound, and where issues between success and failure, sometimes life and death, can be measured in split seconds. If you're a fighter pilot, you know that your performance depends fundamentally on the fit between you and your cockpit. Because after all, what good is the best technology in the world if you can't reach the critical instruments when you need them the most? But this presents a challenge for the Air Force, because obviously pilots are not the same size. So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit that can fit the most individuals? For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. Do you know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? It means you're not, no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. It doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile and you design a cockpit on average, you've literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem. And their response was bold. They banned the average. Meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average size pilot. And instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size. Meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, they wanted a cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow. Now, the companies that made these planes, as you could imagine, weren't happy, right? They argued and lobbied, and they said it's going to be impossible, or at least impossibly expensive, to build a flexible cockpit. But once they realized that the Air Force wasn't going to budge, suddenly it was possible. And it turned out it wasn't that expensive. And in fact, they made great strides, leveraging simple solutions that we all take for granted in our everyday lives, like adjustable seats. And as a result, the Air Force not only improved the performance of the pilots that they already had, but they dramatically expanded their talent pool. And today, we have the most diverse pool of fighter pilots ever. But here's the thing, many of our top pilots would have never fit in a cockpit designed on average. So most of us have never sat in the cockpit of a $150 million fighter jet, right? But we've all sat in the classroom.
And boom, there we are. What he says is true for classrooms as well. There are exactly 0 jet pilots who are average in every way. So cockpit seats must be made adjustable. There are exactly 0 students who are average in every way. And so our seats must be made adjustable. If this is our cockpit, we need to personalize not just the seats, but the room. And that starts, inside each kid's brain and knowing what's there. So we know you're all growing. We know that it's constantly changing. And for us to take home the lesson that we need to design our learning space for the edges, right? To see who everybody is and cover as many people as possible, we really need to take these unadjustable in a row, highly, all the same seats, and we need to change it around a little bit. And that's what this lesson's about. So we all have unique learner profiles. We know that we're always making neural connections that are new. Knowing and using your own profile is called the growth mindset. And the more we know of our profiles, the more we can personalize both my relationship with the students, but also student learning. This set of categories, memory, language, knowledge, reading, vocabulary, curiosity, perceptual and cognitive, and interest, those are some sets of categories. There's lots of different tests and lots of different types of categories. And so the type of category we pick is really important because there are a lot of ones that are, like, for example, multiple intelligences at this point, or Myers-Briggs, not really firmly based in science and not really firmly based in biology. And we're really coming from a how's the brain developing mindset. So this is your brain and this is how it works. At this point, I'll ask the students to take out a journal. There's a little journal icon on the top and start a journal entry. And I'll ask them to write about the 3 different areas of their brain. As a note to us, this is part of the Universal Design for Learning UDL graphic set that's from cast.org. Then on the bottom slide in this slideshow, there are a bunch of different materials around this particular background and this particular information. But basically, I would ask students to write down the 3 areas. The first area, the green area in the middle, is the very innermost, earliest part of the brain to develop. It includes parts of the limbic system. It's the emotional reaction center. It's all about why you care or why I care and how we engage in ideas, what hooks our attention, and different kinds of things hook different people. We all know that we're all slightly different, but some things are very powerfully hooking. Even smells come right in here, and so when you want to learn something, it always starts with this emotional connection and something that really draws you in, hooks your attention, and then moves towards the purple area of the brain. That's the hindbrain. It develops throughout childhood. It involves recognition of words, numbers, and images. What is that? And children who learn to read, who learn to write, who learn to count and do math are developing their hindbrain neural connections. Is concerned with how to access information, how to get stuff to sink into your brain. A set of what we would call it numeracy, right? Literacy. And it's not really, deep thought. It's just the mechanics of, can you do it? Can you make it happen? And then the front of the brain, another part of the notes that I would ask students to write down, has to do with expressing learning. Forebrain develops in adolescence all the way through really age 24. It judges ideas, plans, strategies, develops persistence, and is concerned with strategies to express learning and thinking, really showing how you're going to best express what you learn and how you're going to make it work for you, how you're going to succeed. So these 3 pieces, the midbrain, the inner brain, and the forebrain, really all work together, and they all kind of work in a sequence. And that sequence is at this point pretty well established. Tom Brady, we quoted him earlier, is he's the greatest of all time, one of the most successful football players of all time. And he understands this, not only concept of leveraging your brain, but we could sit and discuss a little bit, and you could write an answer, a parodic answer here. Why is it good to know how your brain learns? Why is it good to know these parts of your brain and how they work? And if you have thoughts, you can go ahead and write some thoughts for us. And And I'm just going to put our responses up here. See if we have any responses. Yeah, personalized learning. Let me welcome you, if you'd like to, instead of typing, to also just unmute and just share your thinking too. That's fine. We're such a small group. That would be perhaps appropriate. Make learning authentic. Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things that I want students to get to is the idea that if you understand how you're learning, then you're more likely to stay engaged when you experience setbacks, and you're more likely to develop strategies that help you succeed. If ultimately Yuval Harari says, humans are sense-making machines, right? We're not infallible. We have very complicated routines, but we just have routines, algorithms that we behave by, habits. If you know what your habits are that are really strong, then ultimately you can succeed. Understand how they learn and help us as learners know what strengths and weaknesses are. Just, yeah, exactly. So I'm going to hide our responses, if that's all right. And then let me just introduce the idea. If we just started, students, we're going to make some cardboard brains to learn about how our brains work, to work on design cycles because they're pretty, to get to know each other, to be creative, to include all of us, and to think with our hands, all of these things that are really important in our classroom. So drag the dot and show me, would you like to know more about this? How do you feel about this? How does your inner brain feel about this topic? I'd like to know. And you can drag the little icon and we can take a look, and you can move them around, and I can lock the screen if you're the kind of kid who were shaking it around and being crazy or whatever. But yeah, okay. So we're all there, guys. That's good. We're gonna move to the next slide. Okay. So if that's why we're doing this, the next thing I would put out there is, what do you need to do? What do you need to know? So we'll start with what we found out so far. If we had this phenomenon, we saw some brains and we talked a little bit about the parts of the brain. This is what we found out so far, that brains are learning. We're all unique. Learning requires us first to engage with the idea and then access information about that idea and then express what we've learned in some way. And knowing how to do that and how to learn is really the key to being successful as a person at solving problems, feeling good about yourself, getting more stuff done, remembering where your keys are, a lot of different kinds of things. So here's an example. This is Emily's cardboard brain. You can see Emily made some design choices here. This is a question for us. What are some of the design choices that she made? And what are some aspects of her profile? You can sort of see it in there. And if we were a class, we'd sort of just talk about this a little bit. Emily, as you can see, is a hockey player. She really likes hockey and leadership, her family, stuff like that. So that's an example. There's a checklist that goes with this. Here's Peter. You can see he designed a shape that reflects him in some way. Literally, it's actually Peter's hand. Emily went with a hockey stick. So you need to think about it as shape or design that's going to reflect you. And you can put that in, Pear Deck right here if you want to put an idea what yours would look like. And on it, you're going to write down 5 or more passions, 5 or more LE, that's learning expectation, strengths. I'll talk about those in a second. And 5 or more learning preferences. So it's like a checklist. These are the things you need to have on it. And we'll talk about what each of those is. So we could look what yours, can we just see, did anybody, who said, look like a brain, more realistic. Mice, mice on the brain, Adriana. Yes, that's got to be you, right? And on the teacher side of things, I can, just as an aside note, I can download student responses to Pear Deck with student notes. I can star responses. There's a teacher dashboard here, actually. Well, I'm not going to open it. I don't know. Do you want to see the teacher dashboard? So I would do it in a new window. The only thing is that typically if I run Pear Deck, I've got either 2 windows or 2 devices running. I'm not going to do that. Okay, mice, books. All right, I'm going to hide our responses. Oh, what are you playing? Playing video games, right on. All right, I'm going to hide our responses and I'm going to move forward a slide. So
that's also very crazy that you can see us typing responses.
Oh yeah.
Because
And I
then
can,
like there's no hiding it. It's kind of like, I'm going to put in something and then I'm not going to do it. You delete it. And it's like, oh, it's already there. Like I can capture your first thoughts. It's
Yeah.
crazy to me.
And also there's a bunch of different types of pains. We could do a session on just on Pear Deck. I mean, I'd love to. because
Probably there.
we really-
You know what? Come on Thursday when we're doing resource sharing and chat about it. Because yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. It is a little bit of a trap for kids who like to write things that are not entirely appropriate. So it's a learning moment if you get somebody who writes something horrible.
Well, welcome to middle school. I was a middle school teacher.
Oh,
You
yeah.
gotta know, right?
Yes, indeed. So briefly, the materials we would use are these 5 or more passions from people's personal experience, like maybe this kid right here is an ultimate Frisbee player. 5 or more LE strengths, the MHS, Montpelier High School learning expectations, Montpelier High School learning expectations. This is the list of transferable skills that students need to demonstrate in order to have graduation credit at Montpelier High School. Their transferable skills are flexible pathways as part of this as well. Ways that students demonstrate these skills, and everybody has some of these skills. They're part of our curriculum. So identifying these skills and which ones you feel are strengths is an important part of your learning profile. And then lastly, this right column is 5 or more learning preferences from this survey. And I think you could probably click the link to pop open the survey. It is from a UDL, Universal Design for Learning text. And there's at the bottom, at the end of our slideshow, there's several good UDL resources, including the text that this comes from. And the survey is what we'll use to identify the engage, access, and express preferences for each student, so that we can sort of get a sense of what kinds of things kids like to do and how they like to learn, and people can think about them for themselves. So the passions are kind of person. The LEs come from this chart: communication, writing, reading, creativity, habits of learning, citizenship, and problem solving. And so these are documents that go on the table in front of students, or you can give them an online version. But they select some of those 5 that they're strong in. But the surveys are sort of the heart of the matter. And I put 3 parts of the surveys here. They're from, here's the book, Make Learning Personal by Brady and McClaskey, with a foreword by John H. Clark, who for many years was a professor of education at UVM and was one of my mentors. He's a wonderful, wonderful man. And a neat guy to talk with about this kind of stuff, about personalizing curriculum. But if you look at this survey, this is what I would ask students to do. In the engage, what hooks my attention, I ask them to highlight 3 strategies that are clear strengths and put a star next to one that might be a challenge. And on the next slide, there's the access, to highlight 3 strategies that are strengths and put a star next to one that might be a challenge. And then express, how do I best learn what I learn? We would highlight 3 and put a star next to strategy that might be a challenge. If I were to do this online as a Pear Deck, there's a Pear Deck slide that lets people draw on the slide, and I could do that for each of you and download each person's online written version of this as well. And I could go into student mode where you could page forward and backward through the slideshow yourself and interact with your own version of the slideshow. And then I just download each person's slideshow. I could get your handouts that way. I'm not going to do that. That's beyond really what.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Just so that Adriana and Shari know, well, Shari may know, but the state of Vermont has indicated that we have our content standards and then we have our transferable skills, which in order for a student to graduate needs to be proficient in both our content and the transferable skills. So my question, and this might just be a clarifying question, Eli, is saying that when you're creating these brains, is it an opportunity to connect a little bit of like neuroscience with the habits of, or not habits of work, but a little neuroscience with those transferable skills in a way that can be quantified and reported out on a little bit? I'm just wondering, because it's a question that we get around the state, is how do you measure and report out on transferable skills, which we have identified as like extremely important to creating that growth mindset and creating students that are like,
Yeah,
you know, ready to graduate and ready to be functioning adults. But the actual quantifying of that, we even at the state, we're collecting that data. We don't have an answer. And so is this how you guys are doing it in Montpelier, or how you are as a science teacher?
Excellent question. There are a lot of good lagging indicators, like test scores or credit in school, and this is a leading indicator, right? Like, what is the student self-identifying, and I'll ask students later on in the year to identify, particularly in the habits of learning category, that green one, which is one of our major transferable skills that has a lot to do in the middle school with the prefrontal cortex, like your executive functioning skills, all of the things that we want kids to be developing. But we'll ask kids to identify ones that they feel strong in. And then as we go through in the middle school and the high school, all of the power standards that are part of our guaranteed and viable curriculum marry a piece of content. In science, it'd be performance expectation with, which is like a science skill and a piece of science knowledge with one of these LEs: problem solving, communication, writing, reading, citizenship, habits of learning, creativity. This one, making a cardboard brain, is tied with creativity. This is to do with brainstorming and synthesis and connections. And that's the one that's generally attached to engineering, sometimes problem solving as well, in terms of choosing an approach. This one is not really in the heart of most engineering, in the sense that there's a lot of creativity here and less actual technical engineering cycle process, but it sets the stage for that. So a leading indicator, self-reported, and then as we go through, it ties with some of our formative assessments, which are put in alongside the formative assessments that we give, that we call them checkpoints, tie into both the LEs and content standards. Like, if you want, we can talk about that another time too. That's something I'd be very happy to go into more depth about. Okay, so we've got the LEs, which are the graduation indicators for our high school, and then they've got this learning preference. They take these 3 slides, this survey, this doc. We ask students to identify 3 things that are strengths in how they access, how they engage, and then how they express what they do. And if you look at some of these, they say things like, I can draw my ideas. I enjoy writing stories. I like to discuss. I can summarize and paraphrase. I enjoy defending my position. I'm a good presenter and speaker. I can use presentations and computer technology. These are from Bray and McClaskey out of their UDL sort of playbook, but you could pick other things as well that have to do with engage, express, and access information. So I ask students right now, drag a dot. Do you understand the cardboard brain checklist? What goes in? Your passions, your LEs that you're sort of strong in, and then also some parts of this document. And they drag the dot, and right here, because we've done this rather quickly. Yeah, let's take a look at where people are. You guys are okay. If everybody says no, that doesn't mean I don't keep going, but it does mean that I got to think more carefully about my next steps, right? And what to emphasize and how to go. And Pear Deck is good for that. Okay, so if that was the what we do, this is how we're going to do it. How does it go? And this is the way it goes. We're going to use a cardboard brain design brief. That's a design process. I give you the specifications in the brief, and then you use a process. It's part of our SEP engineering practice toolbox. We'll do a whole bunch of different sets of tools, like reading graphs, explaining evidence. There's lots of different tools. And this one, before you actually touch the real tools and the materials, requires you to have a plan. Really important. So here's the process. This is from a really excellent one. Is from the Works. It's a museum for kids. And it says, first we identify the problem. How do I learn? We explore about it, do some surveys, design and think up an idea. Then you make your idea and try it out and see if it works, or if it needs to be made better, and you can make it better. And then you can design it again. And you check it out, and then you build it, and you try it out, and you can make it better, and you keep going. I use a metaphor: cupcake, birthday cake, wedding cake. The first one you do is a cupcake. The second one, that's a birthday cake. The third one is really fancy. Not everybody necessarily does that. That's like a wedding cake, right? We are rating these under personal development, quality work on time. That's an assessment. It is a habits of learning score in our school's grading system. So I'm tying the student's leading indicator for their statement of what they are interested in with this grade, and it'll be part of a formative assessment. And this is the rubric that actually we use. So the cupcake is where you start. You write 5 passions, 5 LEs, and 5 preferences from the survey in your journal. Draw a draft of possible cardboard brain ideas in your journal and get a yellow check from me, the teacher, in your journal before proceeding on to a birthday cake. You start playing around with the toys, make a cardboard brain in a shape that reflects in some way you as a person. And then this wedding cake thing, there's a link to a graphic design slideshow that I created. It's based on Chip Kidd's work in the book Go, a kid's graphic design, and it's a slideshow full of sort of self-directed slideshow full of stuff. You can take a look at it. It's in the it is in the, you know what I'm going to do right here. I'm actually going to copy that link, and I'm going to put the link to our slideshow in the chat. Okay, where's our chat? This is, since we're all here, a link to the Google Drive folder that has this slideshow, a copy of that slideshow as well. And then also it has the document, the 3-page learning survey that the kids use to check their engage, access, express zones of their brain. So this is the basic design where you start with a cupcake, you go up to a birthday cake, and then you may want to go on to a wedding cake and iterate your design 3 times. That would be great if you do. We'll use this metaphor, cupcake, birthday cake, wedding cake, throughout the year. Gonna stop before anybody gets any tools out. We're gonna be safe. We're gonna talk about safety, cutting on a mat, gluing over paper, putting tools away, wearing goggles or other eye protection, not wasting cardboard, recycling scraps, not killing Sharpies, all kinds of good stuff, right? So we'll put that out there, and that's on a table sheet also that sort of sits on the tables, and kids look at that. And then this is where we start. You open your journal. This is a journal entry. Write down these things, the passions, the LEs, the preferences in your journal. Talk about it with your friends. Draw a draft of some ideas, and then when you're ready, get a yellow check mark, and then move on to the next, birthday cake phase, where you start looking. In this case, I'll have a cart in my room, a gray cart, one of those shop carts, and it'll have cardboard and all kinds of useful materials. And to give you a sense of what's available, this Cheez-It box was brought in from a student at home because she loves Cheez-Its. But this skull is something that was just pure cardboard, but some of this other stuff is foam core, like that field hockey stick towards the back is foam core. There's some clay on the left, although it's not really clear. That blue, green, red, and gray blobby thing is the Mandalorian ship from the Mandalorians, like Star Wars universe stuff. And there's a whole bunch of other things. The hand with the brain is that back there towards the back. And some kids just really stick with the cardboard. Other kids get paint and glue and fuzzy things, a lot of different materials to use. So then it's a day or 2 or 3 of kids sort of working and putting stuff together and building representations of themselves. So I'm going to stop our, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close the presentation session of the Pear Deck, and you can close that window also. We're going to leave that site. Sorry, guys. And I'm going to jump back to the learning activity progression in just normal. Here we go, all the way through this stuff, all the way in just normal slides. And we're not going to do any breakout rooms, but just question to all of us on what ideas or connections do you have, and what adaptations might make it work well or better for you or in general. And since Adriana, you're working in a hospital, you're not teaching in a middle school science classroom or a high school science or an elementary school science classroom. So, any ideas any of you have and feedback, and we can just sort of kick some ideas around is good. But I had created a Jamboard here for us to post ideas, and we could just sort of randomly, openly discuss the idea of what works. And that's the session, really.
Want me to take him out? The dog.
So,
Sorry.
yeah. There goes the dog.
Sorry, we were talking about the dog. Yeah, I mean, I kind of asked my question before regarding those transferable skills, because there's a discussion on how to do it well in a very meaningful way within the confines of a classroom, especially like science classroom. So I don't know. I think that one of the questions that I had was, and I'm going to go back to the slide because I just wanted to get again a clarifying statement on slide 38, which was your what to do cardboard brain design brief, where you had the cupcake, birthday cake, and then wedding cake analogy. That too, 1 second, please.
Yep.
Sorry. We don't have school today, obviously, because it's Martin Luther King Day, but that adds layers of complexity to my home life. That 2, 3, and 4, is that what you're using to tie it to like a proficiency scale, because this is your rubric? So like, you know what I mean? So like if a 2 is, am I thinking about that correctly? Like 2 is developing, 3 is proficient, 4 is expanding, or am I not?
Exactly.
Oh.
Just
So-
so. And-
So then
and-
do you have a level 1, or does Montpelier just start at 2?
No, good question. At Montpelier High School, 0 is no evidence. 1 is very minimal evidence. 2 is emerging proficiency. 3 is proficient. 4 exceeds proficiency. Right now at the middle school, through a hiccup or misunderstanding or something, a 1 is no evidence, a 2 is emerging, a 3 meets the standard, and 4 exceeds the standard. And this standard right here is personal development, quality work on time. In this particular case, I could potentially find a performance expectation that was tied to neurology, or I could find another one. There are several around engineering, but for me to really put an engineering standard on this rubric, for example, 2, student iterates at least once in a way that doesn't use all steps of the engineering cycle. 3, student iterates design and uses multiple steps to improve and demonstrate results. I would want to have multiple, I would have probably 2 or 3 opportunities to teach and assess. And you know how I had that question, do you understand this? I would build that more firmly into the instructional progression. And later on, in the first unit of the year, we do it's rocket science, and I'm designing catapults and things like that. When we're actually constructing machines, there is a much more robust assessment around engineering as a standard. But this is as the first part of the year, helping kids to understand this is a 2, this is a 3, this is a 4, and this is the way a design cycle is meant to work. You start with something and get them used to the idea that you probably almost certainly will start with a 2, and then you'll have to improve it and upgrade it to get to a 3, and then you'll improve it and upgrade it and reach beyond to get to a 4. I think it's often an elementary school perspective that you can just do it and get a 4 right out of the gate, and you just succeed. And kids who are successful and make it look easy, who just get 4s, are smart. And I really, in 7th and 8th grade, want to send a very clear message that almost everybody starts with a 2, and it takes real work to get up to a 3, and it takes even more work to get to a 4. And that's really helping to prepare students for what high school is like and the expectations in high school classes, where you may need to multiple times need to get feedback and improve your work, whether it's engineering or really anything. And so this is sort of the beginning of that mindset also. Like, you got to keep working at it, you got to be persistent, you got to identify your best strategy.
I need to add Adriana's point in the chat. I think that, which she says that she's really keen on using this concept to start the conversation. I think that this would be a good starting activity to introduce a unit, right? Because it gets students to start thinking about how they think. Well, obviously, what is it's called metacognitive, like obviously, duh, Maggie. But yeah, I think that I can see moving this even more forward is taking a look at not necessarily, what pieces of the engineering SEPs, not necessarily the actual standard, because the standard is three-dimensional, but if Montpelier is reporting out at the SEP level, which a lot of people are using their SEPs, science and engineering practices, as their proficiency-based graduation requirements. And that's a whole other conversation that I have a lot to say about, but I digress. Thinking about looking at the science and engineering practices and being very intentional in how you're putting them and including them on a rubric, I think would be really great as a way. And I keep going back to that transferable skill piece, because that's where I know that a lot of our science educators struggle, which is, how do I represent this? And I think that this might be a great opportunity to be able to do that.
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, that makes great sense. The 6 through 8 engineering SEP is like designing. I think it's designing solutions. I feel like that's what it is, but it specifically says that you take a list of criteria and then design a solution that meets those criteria, or language about like that. We could probably Google it and get a more close read. But this is, I think, training kids to use a checklist, to understand that. And if this were just the beginning, I would want to actually, not only quote the language, but the transferable skill that this is sort of aiming at is quality work on time. Can you do it? Can you keep working at it? Can you make it of a high enough level of quality? And that it's like a habits of learning kind of a standard. There's 2 on our school report card. There's this one, and student shows respect for the learning environment, which is a lot of sort of teamwork oriented stuff. And so we build all sort of common language and definitions around what that looks like as well. But yeah, no, engineering is a core part of what we do. It's not one of the guaranteed and viable curriculum choices that we made. It's interesting, Maggie. We picked 3 SEPs to really, really highlight. One is arguing from evidence, one is modeling, and one is developing explanations. And we sort of picked those out of the NGSX training. Those are the 3 that they really privilege and sort of highlight. And for us, those are ones that in every unit we're sure that we use. And those are like, you saw that toolbox icon earlier. Those are things in our school. We want those 3 things to be in kids' toolboxes. So when I say modeling, they know, it shows a process. It's got words, it's got text. There's some elements to it that they can just say, these are parts of what it means to have a model, right? And it's a common definition through all of our units. And similarly with engineering, the design cycle is a tool. Like, you start with an idea, you look at the criteria, you iterate your design, test, improve, design, test, improve. And so that's another one of those things where we'll do it multiple times. So this sort of, it doesn't really specifically name it, but it gets the idea out there. So because you can throw too much, you can throw too much at kids, especially at the beginning of the year. If you just tell them, hey, what you're really going to do is, draw something, maybe your hand, and then cut it out with cardboard and then paint it, you'll win a lot of kids over. That's especially this year. I mean, this is a tough year for me to put a rubric in front of kids and start leaning in. It's much better to say, actually, here's a Sharpie, and why don't you put some yellow stars on this for the things you like to do, and let's write those over here. You don't want to write them, we'll talk. So
I hate to cut this conversation short, but I am significantly late for another meeting.
I want to show you a slide. There's a link to the presentation resources folder, then some links to UDL and neuroanatomy resources, and then design resources. That's us.
And your information is there, so that if folks that either are watching this or Shari or Adriana want to reach out and ask you questions, they've got that. Your info is on there.
It is.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. And thank you, Shari and Adriana. And thank you to whoever is going to be watching this in the future, because we know a lot of people are going to. But have a great rest of the day. And hopefully we will see you guys tomorrow. 4:30 is when we start with elementary evolution, which I am super pumped about. And that's it. So have a great one. I hope everyone stays warm and can dig themselves out of the snow, because I'm gonna have to snow plow or snow blow probably in about an hour.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye,
Thank you.
guys. Thank